All righty. Here we are, March 1st. March 1st. Does it feel like March 1st to you?
Not yet.
Not yet. This is obviously pre recorded. This is session 2 with Shelley Harrison, volunteer district captain for the Convention of States. And tonight we'll be doing session 2 on the United States Constitution. Are you ready for your slideshow?
Yes, please. Thank you. All right.
And I'm turning everything over to Kelly, and I'm turning my mic off so I don't bother her.
Okay.
If you all watched the first one, you know kind of what to expect. And this will be airing as a live show. So if you're watching and have questions, Shelley will be in the chat to answer any questions you have. Okay, Shelley?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dale. We're going to continue this 4-part series of the Constitution, and my goal is to impart the basics of the Constitution. If you listened to the first session, you can go back and take a look at that to see what items I used to be able to put all this information together and bring it to you. The history of the Constitution, making of the Constitution. Last time we talked about the framers and who they were and what happened to them. And, today we're going to talk, more about the framing of the Constitution. So if you'll change it to the next slide. Before we get into it, though, I think it's important to let everyone know, if this is the first time you're watching this or if you've seen this before, I am a volunteer with the Convention of States. It's a grassroots movement, the largest grassroots movement actually in the United States, of we the people working to bring power back to the states and to the people. Our goal and mission is to threefold. We want to see the federal government reined in. Our rights have and liberties have been infringed upon. Our founders believed that a federal government was to be subservient to and to serve the states. It was to bring them together and unite them and, uniform for commerce and those kinds of things. What we see today are career bureaucrats, unelected as well as elected bureaucrats. We have seen fiscal irresponsibility within our federal government. That's one thing that we'd like to see an amendment done on is, bringing fiscal responsibility to the federal government, and then reestablishing the control of the states. I don't know about you, but I feel like that is super important. And lastly, I think it's also important for us to realize, as citizens in this United States, our Constitution says we the people. We are a constitutional republic that was established by the people, for the people, and the government is to be protecting our inalienable rights. We talked about that in session 1, and as citizens, it is our individual responsibility to all of us be stewards of the Constitution, to protect and defend the liberty and freedoms that we hold dear, and to pass those along to the next generation to do the same. I am always looking for help, and even if you just have a few minutes once a month to come and help me, or to chat on the phone. There's all sorts of little details that I could use some help with. So if you're willing to spend a little time with me once a month, reach out and contact me. In the meantime, You'll see the website on the page, conventionofstates.com. Go there to learn more about what the Convention of States Action is and what our goals are. Sign that petition because our legislators see that and they hear our collective voice through that. So, next slide. All right. I start every time with a verse, and this verse is near to my heart as well. Psalm 33:12 says this: "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people for whom He has chosen as His heritage." God has blessed our nation for centuries, and I'm hopeful that He will continue to bless this nation for centuries going forward. So, next slide, please. All right. So today's agenda, I want to talk more about why our framers moved from the Articles of Confederation to the actual Constitution. Then we're going to get into the structure of the Constitution, the preamble, the 7 articles, and the 27 amendments, or the Bill of Rights. When I started this journey volunteering for Convention of States, I could name 2 of our Bill of Rights, 2 of the amendments, and that's the First Amendment and the Second Amendment. You know, free speech and the right to bear arms. I couldn't have told you what the 17th Amendment was or the 27th Amendment was, none of that. And so through this, I've learned a whole lot. I've read multiple books for this, and I have used the websites of the National Archives and the U.S. Constitution.gov. So we're also going to talk a little bit more about the expansion of the Constitution by judicial rulings and some of the sources that we can look at today that tell us where our forefathers were thinking, what they were thinking, what their intention for this great country was. So next slide, please. So this is the preamble, very short, very simple, but so important. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Next slide, please. So, the Articles of Confederation was a treaty between the sovereign states. It was not a constitution, but it was a loose-fitting constitution that the framers used to unite the states and to develop relationships between the states. So while technically it was not a constitution, it sort of acted as that. It was a very loose document. And in the beginning, under the Articles of Confederation, after the country was established, its freedom from England, the states, there were some issues with the states. They bickered. They didn't always agree, and there was some infighting between the states. Well, it became clear that the framers needed to go back to the table, and initially they were to, rewrite or reframe the Articles of Confederation. So the framers were extremely fearful of an overly powerful central government because they had just come from and broken from the English monarchy that they were throwing off. The states were each considered sovereign. So under the Articles of Confederation, each state could tax, issue its own currency, maintain its own militia, regulate its own trade. The federal government, under the Articles of Confederation was in tremendous debt, 42 million, mostly to Americans, and that was, after the Revolutionary War. Under the Articles of Confederation, the central government had no power to tax, no power to regulate the trade, no power to compel the states to follow any kind of regulations or nullification. There was no federal judiciary, so there was no, courts that were at the federal level, and so there they went back to amend or reinforce the articles, and one of the things that they had to face was the fact that the articles explicitly stated that they could not make changes without all 13 states being in agreement. There is no way that all 13 states were going to agree on everything. There were 8 attempts between 1781 and 1786 to do so, and they failed. And the greatest weakness that the Articles of Confederation had was that there was no connection to the authority of we the people, as they had stated in the Declaration of Independence. So next slide, please. So the preamble that we just read a few minutes ago is the introduction to the official Constitution. It gives a source of power to the people. It illustrated the framers' intent that it would be established and ordained to be the legal instrument for lasting posterity or future generations. And then it establishes the authority for the government, that it flows from the people and not the government, that the people have the political power, and that governance is by the consent of the governed. Very, very different than other democracies in that day and era, and definitely very different than, the tyrannical countries that had monarchies. So in the end, the government must obey the law, and the government is not above the law. So we're going to talk next about the articles within the Constitution. So to establish the structure, scope, and limited powers of government, our framers established a system of federalism. Federalism is where the states have their sovereignty and the federal government, they work together with the states, and they establish different branches of that federal government. It defines the process of amendments and the protection of the individual's citizens' rights. Each branch of the government has its own responsibilities. No branch is allotted too much power. That was purposeful. Again, our framers were very fearful of a powerful central government, and they understood human nature. They understood that every government in history eventually allotted too much, garnered too much power, and became overreaching and tyrannical. So each branch exercises some control over the others, which is a balancing act, and the power is divided between the state and national governments. So Article 1 establishes the legislative branch, which is Congress and the Senate, and they make the laws. The executive branch, which is the president and the agencies that report to him, and then the judicial branch, which establishes the court system, the federal court system. And then the state-to-state relations is addressed in Article 4. Article 5 is the amendment process, which I've talked at length so far about that. And then Article 6 establishes the Constitution as the supreme law of the land. And then Article 7 goes through the ratification process. So we're going to move forward on that. I'm going to talk in the last 2 sessions in detail about each of the amendments. Okay, so the Bill of Rights was not initially ratified with the original constitutional document. That came after, a little bit after, and the initial Bill of Rights were 10 amendments. Now, there was some discussion, lots and lots of debate between the framers of the Constitution about what amendments should be in there. There was a lot of fear from some factions that if we listed certain amendments that or certain rights that it would be construed to be those were the only rights of the people, which was never the intent. They were fearful of limiting those rights to the people. So that's why Article 5 allowed for the Constitution to be amended going forward, but never to be rewritten. And I'll explain that in detail at a different slide. So the Bill of Rights establishes protections to the people. Again, that, as I said in the first session, that does not mean that the government is granting you rights. The government is not granting you rights. God grants you those rights, and our Constitution protects, and particularly our Bill of Rights, protect the people from the government infringing upon those rights. So the first 10 amendments were ratified in 1791. And as I said before, an additional 23 have been proposed by Congress since then, and the states have ratified 17 of those. Below, you'll see the first 10 amendments. As I said, I was familiar with the first two: freedom of speech, the right to peaceably assemble, and of course, our dear religious freedoms. And then second is the right of the people to keep and bear arms. And then third is the restrictions on quartering of soldiers. I'll talk a little bit more about that too. Quartering of soldiers in private homes, protection against unreasonable search and seizure, protection under due process of the law, rights to speedy and public trials and an impartial jury of your peers, right to a jury trial in a civil lawsuit, prohibits excessive fines and bail and cruel and unusual punishment. And then any rights, I really love the ninth one, any rights not enumerated in the Constitution to the federal government are retained by the people and the states. And then the federal government possesses only those powers delegated and enumerated to it through the Constitution. All other powers, again, reserved to the states and the people.
I'm going to jump in.
Oh, question? Okay, Dale has a question.
You've talked about the republic as opposed to democracy. Republic's based on law.
Do what?
Republic is based on laws.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're a democracy. And I'm going to modernize the way I learned it. You buy a new car. That's your car. John over here wants your car. He gets the majority of people to say that should be his car. Now it's his car because democracy ruled. The way we're set up with the republic is based on law. That's your car.
Right.
I don't care if 99 out of 100 people say John should have that car. It's still your car. People need to understand the difference between a true democracy and a republic.
A true republic.
Yes.
That's a good point.
Could you imagine what it would take if we were a true democracy and had to vote on every little thing we did?
Right.
City taxes.
And to your point, Dale, everything must be balanced and in alignment with the document of the United States Constitution. Thank you for that.
Yes.
Okay, next slide.
Now I'll shut up.
Okay, so I'm going to go into the structure of the Constitution. So as I said, Article 1 establishes that legislative branch. It establishes Congress and Senate, giving them sole responsibility to make federal laws. Um, Today, I see in the last couple decades some presidents possibly making laws using the executive pen. I think that should be challenged. It has been challenged, and something that the judicial branch should be looking closely to the exact wording of the Constitution. Article 1 provides enumerated powers to the federal government. Enumerated powers means specific powers to the federal government. Powers to regulate interstate, powers on foreign commerce, powers to provide for our common defense and our general welfare, powers to coin money and regulate the value of the money, and powers to declare war. One of the issues that we're seeing today is our border. Common defense and the need to secure our border is clearly a responsibility of the federal government. Yet many of our southern states are having to protect the borders themselves. So the executive branch, what does the executive branch do? It establishes the president and the vice president, the president's cabinet, the departments and independent agencies that all report up to the president. It also establishes the electors and electoral college, which gave smaller states with fewer population an even voice with larger, more populated states. Yes, that was established from the beginning. I know there is some debate today whether the electoral college is, still a useful and good thing. And I'm not here to debate that today. And then the judicial branch was established to interpret law, and the Supreme Court was established to be the ultimate final decision making on interpreting those laws. So if you go to the next slide, I think it's important to understand how the separation of power creates an intricate circle of checks and balances between the three branches. I tried to come up with some kind of a circle to do this, and I'm just not creative enough to do that. But basically, Congress creates laws, but the judicial can declare those laws unconstitutional if they see them as unconstitutional. Congress can create laws, but the president can veto congressional legislation. So all three branches of the government can balance each other out as laws are being created. I think it's also important to know that Congress can approve nominations. So presidential nominations for, Supreme Court, for heads of agencies and different things. So Congress reviews questions, interviews nominees, and that the president nominates and approves or disapproves. Congress also controls the budget. Congress can impeach the president and remove him or her from the office. The president can nominate judges. The Senate confirms the president's nominations, and Congress can impeach judges and remove them from office. The judicial can declare presidential acts as unconstitutional. So if you see, it's an intricate circle, even though I didn't illustrate it exactly that way. All three branches have equal balance and should have, equal checks and balances between the three. Okay, so Article 4 is the state-to-state regulations. As I mentioned earlier, the states had, under Articles of Confederation, the states had, infighting between the states. And some states just naturally were stronger than other states, and and that kind of thing. The state-to-state relations that Article 4 lays out gives each state full faith and credit to public acts and judicial proceedings of other states. So states must enforce the civil judgments of the courts or of other states and accept their public records, such as marriage, divorce, and et cetera, as valid. Citizens of other states have the same privileges and immunities when passing through the state. So if I am traveling through the state or if I move from one state to another, the state cannot discriminate against me, as compared to their residents. It did establish extradition requirements. So if we have, a criminal that is cross borders, then a state can request extradition, and the other state must comply with that. It also established that the Congress can admit new states, but not from within a state or by joining states. We have a unique situation going on with Oregon right now, where they want to, carve out of that state into an adjoining state, and so we'll see how that all turns out. But yeah, you cannot withdraw from the union as a state, and then each state is in its entirety, and only Congress can admit new states from, if should a new state come up. Article 5, I know I've talked about this greatly, but Article 5 really shows two ways in which amendments may be proposed. 2/3 of both houses of Congress can propose, and 2/3 of state legislatures can call a national convention to propose. States have, in either situation, states have the sole ratification responsibility, and that requires 3/4 of the states to ratify any new amendment to the United States Constitution. In today's world, that is 38 states, and only 13 states is all it takes to say no to anything. So it's a really good balance of, what states could disagree and kill any kind of potential amendment. And again, it must be within the context and frame of the rest of the Constitution. As I explained earlier in the first session, you can never scrap and start over. That is provided in the first article. So next slide, please. Okay, Article 6 simply makes the Constitution as the supreme law of the land, recognized by all federal laws, treaties, state and local laws. It cannot be superseded. So if a state creates a law that goes against the Constitution, that would certainly make its way to the Supreme Court and be ruled unconstitutional. Article 7 is the ratification process, and in the beginning, it was 9 of the original 13 states were required to ratify the Constitution. Ratification of the original 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of the Constitution between the United States. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about judicial review. Structurally, the 3 branches of government, as I said, were designed to check and balance any potential overreach of power. The Supreme Court has the authority to review and interpret and decide law. And we want that. We need an impartial group of people that are extremely familiar with the Constitution and is responsible to the letter of the Constitution. So judicial review allows the courts to declare actions of governmental bodies, whether it's the state or the federal, as unconstitutional, and therefore prevent governmental overreach. And the original Constitution, as written before the Bill of Rights, was 4,400 words, and it's 7,000 words with the amendment. Today, the Constitution, and I showed you the constitutional law book in the last one, the Constitution is followed, that's followed by the federal government today, has over 3,000 pages of Supreme Court rulings. So the Supreme Court rulings, and I'm not here to comment one way or the other, but you saw the Supreme Court recently overturned Roe v. Wade. For many decades, Roe v. Wade was hotly contested as not being constitutional because there was no constitutional right or amendment outlined in the Constitution to provide for abortion. And it did recently get overturned after some decades of debate. Okay, so what this does, though, is it expounds on the original wording and intent of the framers. The framers knew that our Constitution would have to be amended and grow with the growing society. They were not naive enough to think that their end document was the perfect document for all time. They knew that amendments would have to be made, but the judicial review creates a potential grant of additional power to the federal government, depending on what the Supreme Court, who has the authority to review and decide, states. So something to mull on a little bit there. Next slide. Okay, so what documents are there to support our founding fathers' intentions? First and foremost are congressional records, the original Constitutional Convention minutes, and there was a marginal notes by even George Washington that is kept in the National Archives, and you can see those online and at the National Archives. And little plug, if you've never gone to Washington, D.C. and gone to the National Archives and seen the Constitution in person, do so. I think every American needs to make that pilgrimage ultimately. The Federalist Papers were a weighty support to the framers' intentions. It's a series of 85 essays. If you have never read them, you should get them. They're easy to find online. There's online resources to them. They were primarily written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. They appeared anonymously in the New York newspapers under the pen name of Publius, and they were written to the state of New York, where a lot of argument came from as it relates to the building of the Constitution. The Federalist Papers are actually considered one of the most important sources for interpreting and understanding the original content of the Constitution. And then I would have you, read the signer's own writings. Jefferson wrote extensively. Ben Franklin wrote extensively. Hamilton wrote extensively. Madison wrote extensively. There are so many. I've not read all of them, but there's so many resources. And if you take a look at the bottom of the screen there, you'll see the links to the constitution.congress.gov, and then a link to the Federalist Papers that I've put down there. Next slide. So that's it. You'll see my contact information at the bottom of the page. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions, or if you want to volunteer for Convention of States. I would accept volunteer help that way. Even if you only just have a smidge of time, I'd be thrilled to help familiarize you with our mission and some things that we need help with. So with that, Dale, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. Look at her. You moved over ahead of me. Put me back. That is session 2 about the Constitution of the United States with Shelley Harrison. This will, of course, if you're watching this, you know it's being aired March 1st. The next session will be aired March 8th, be on both YouTube and Facebook on the QRAZ radio page. And again, I'll say if nothing goes wrong, it'll go out over 102.7 FM here in Adrian. Shelley, thank you.
Thank you.
Again,
Great.
the next session will be March 8th. We'll wind this up. We'll get out of your hair. If I can figure out what I'm doing. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Dale.
Y'all have a good night. And we'll talk to you later. Thanks, Shelley.